Hello, my name is Sarah Pate, and I'm a librarian and the director of the Washington Center for the Book, which is an affiliate of the Library of Congress Center for the Book administered by Washington State Library. The Washington Center for the Book promotes literacy and a love of books, reading, and libraries. One of our projects is the Washington State Book Awards, and we are thrilled to have you here with us to celebrate Washington State Book Award winner Katrina Carrasco. Thank you to our fabulous partners for tonight's event, the Tacoma Public Library's Northwest Room, where Katrina did much of her research for this book, and Charlie's Queer Books, where Katrina first held the book launch for this title. Before I introduce our author and our Book Awards judge who will be interviewing her, I'd like to welcome Gina Pion from the Tacoma Public Library's Northwest Room. Gina is here to tell you a little bit about this incredible resource and how you can access it.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you to Katrina for and congratulations for your award. The Northwest Room is a public archive based here in Tacoma that collects the history and stories of the South Puget Sound, particularly in the Tacoma area. But we have many collections that cover basically the before history to today. It includes photographs, maps, manuscripts, a ton of different types of literature, including nonfiction and fiction. And we like to collect material that is produced by folks in the area and from the communities that live and work here. And so I just wanted to let you know that we're available to the public. We have open research hours on Tuesday evenings, on Thursdays from 10 to 6, and Saturdays from 10 to 6. We also host facilitated research appointments, which many folks will avail themselves of to have very direct and assisted historic research from our staff here, and that takes place on Wednesdays and Fridays. And so I encourage anybody who has an interest in history, particularly in this area, to join us, whether visiting our online catalog, which you can access through the Tacoma Public Library website. And our catalog is called ORCA, and that's where you can access all of our digitized content and then lists of material that we have that isn't currently digitized. So there's kind of a difference from accessibility standpoint where things that are digitized are easily accessible online, but we have many more things that are in process and we try to get that stuff out as soon as we can. But our staff is very competent and enthusiastic to help people when you do have research needs. So thank you again for inviting us. Thank you, Katrina, for your work that you've done here and everybody for joining us.
So thank you, Gina. So Katrina Carrasco writes novels, short stories, and essays. Her second novel, Rough Trade, was published in April of 2024 and also won a Lambda Literary Award. Her debut novel, The Best Bad Things, was a finalist in the Lambda Literary Awards and Washington State Book Awards and won the Seamus Award for Best First PI Novel. Her essays and short stories have appeared in publications and on websites, including Crime Inc., Iconic, Witness Magazine, Post Road Magazine, and Literary Hub. She has received support from the Corporation of Yaddo, Gentile Arts, Story Knife Writers Retreat, Artist Trust, and other residencies and foundations, and she is working on a new novel. Marcus Harrison Green is the founder of the South Seattle Emerald, publisher of Hinton Publishing, and a columnist with The Stranger. An award-winning storyteller, he was awarded the Seattle Human Rights Commission's Individual Human Rights Leader Award for 2020 and named the inaugural James Baldwin Fellow by the Northwest African American Museum in 2022. Green was a WSBA judge for the 2024 and 2025 awards and was himself a finalist in 2022. Katrina, congratulations again on this award, and thank you both for being with us this evening.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And Marcus, I'm so excited to be here talking with you. So this is really a treat.
Yeah, Katrina, this is so great to be here. I mean, just reading this book, I had so much envy of like I just wish I could write as well as you. I gotta say, this is rough trade, and I've told friends and family this that it is the best case, I think, for cutting the cord on all streaming platforms because there is nothing as original on Netflix, HBO Max, Tubi even. Oh, I guess Tubi is a low rent one. But anyway, there is nothing as original and creative on any of those streaming platforms as what you put into Rough Trade. And so it is just such an honor to be able to speak with you about it today.
Thank
Um,
you so much. That's so
yeah.
kind.
Oh, hey, I'm a journalist, so I rarely lie. So that is so I'm telling the truth there.
All right.
Uh, that be despite what other people might say about our profession. But anyway, um, that being said, I speaking of originality, yeah, and the book it moves so fluidly between crime, mystery, thriller, historical fiction, and even I'd say tragic romance in some ways.
Mhm.
So I have to ask you, when you were writing it, did you experience the book as excuse me, did you experience the book as one genre at a time, or did it always live in sort of this in-between space? And how, and this is maybe a craft question, but how did you know how to strike the right tonal balance? Because to
Mm.
me, I think you hit it out of the park.
Thank you. So when I think of genre, I tend to kind of put different genres in my head. And obviously, like genre bending and blending is fun and I love doing it. But when I'm thinking about, like, here I have a literary character study that I really want to attach to like a really fast-paced engine to keep people engaged, I might think about something like crime fiction, where there's different sort of moves that a lot of crime writers make. There's some tropes that you can kind of build off of. So it almost feels like I've got my two main characters and I've got my two character studies that I'm kind of doing, and then I'm pulling in pieces of genre and influences and inspiration from multiple genres, and then using them to kind of push things along if I feel like it needs a bit more energy, or if I just love how a plot thread will develop using some kind of tool from a certain genre. Um, so yeah, and just the chance to be able to kind of mash them all up together and have it feel coherent is in some ways like a challenge as a writer, but also I feel like it's so fun because you don't really have to follow a rule, and there's less of an expectation because you're like, well, I just borrowed this one thing and I'm going to borrow this thing too, and no one's going to know what I'm doing, so I can do whatever I want. And that's kind of the creative space that I enjoy when I, move between or take inspiration from different genres of writing.
Yeah, I mean, and it really was, I think, inspiration. There's so oftentimes I'll see um, in popular culture that so many people say that they're paying homage to something or something
Mhm.
that's influencing them, and it's just a bare bones copy. And here you made something so just quite frankly, I mean, so original. I mean, it's so unique, I should say, in terms of what you were able to do. So again, kudos to you for that. And
Yeah.
yeah, I know that there are some writing mentees that I have that are watching today, and again, I just want to stress that by reading this book, I think they could learn quite a bit. But that being said, getting back into the novel,
Hmm.
it is steeped so heavily in duality, right? With many of
Hmm.
the characters, these there's sort of this public self versus the private truths. There's survival versus desire. There's love versus betrayal. At what point did you realize that duality wasn't just a theme, but really the engine of the book?
Yeah, so I think for me, that came from a very intentional place, and it started with the two main characters because you have two people who, on paper, share some intersections and traits, but have very different personalities, and as such, have just kind of like taken diverging paths entirely. So it's sort of that feeling of the flip side of a coin. Um, And I really liked being able to kind of compare what Ben and Alma would do. It helped me, especially with the character of Ben, because I'd spent time with Alma in Best Bad Things. So I was able to really kind of use her as a channel I knew, like a groove I was in, and then thinking about, well, what would this person with, again, some very, unique similarities, what would they do in a totally different way? So it really started the duality, I think, with those two characters and how they played off of each other. And then I think because it was such a strong theme with them to start with, it kind of felt natural to branch out in other ways in the book.
Mm.
But they were kind of the two like guiding stars of that particular dynamic.
Yeah, well, again, uh, to me, you you handled that very excellently, I'll say. Um,
Thank you.
I do want to ask you, one of the sort of striking ideas in the novel, and sort of speaking on in continuing down this sort of line of questioning about duality. One of the most striking ideas in the novel is that people aren't always hiding who they are, that sometimes the mask is the only way they can be themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I've thought about that so much, whether it's in this day and age, vis-a-vis race, vis-a-vis, being, folks who are members of the LGBTQIA plus community,
Mm.
um, you know, vis-a-vis some of the things that are going on in our world right now.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask, how did you think about performance as both a constraint and a freedom while writing these characters? Because I think, these characters are so richly complex, and I mean, as a reader, you felt everything from either agony to, you know, disdain for him to understanding to love for him. And like, I mean, that's in the span of maybe 5 pages for some of these characters. So,
Yeah, so I think I'm very interested in performance, just as kind of a macro concept. And I do feel that we all perform very differently in our different parts of our lives, right? Like if we're in an office, we probably have like an office persona.
mm,
Right now we're in our author personas, right? So like these are a way we perform. And that doesn't mean it's inauthentic, but it's
right.
certainly kind of a mode you kind of fall into or that you channel. Um, and we perform in public for safety reasons sometimes, to go by unseen, to go by unharassed, like whatever reasons we have for our different performances. So that idea, just on the whole, interests me very much. Um, and I think in terms of a freedom versus a constraint, that was another place where I was able to really get into this idea from two different paths because there's
Mm,
Alma and there's Ben primarily as the
right.
main character studies. And I think Alma is a character who finds a lot of freedom in performance, who might,
Yes.
be wearing a mask or performing, but that feels very authentic for her. And I think there's power in that for her, and the performance allows her to access things that she wouldn't be able to if she weren't inhabiting this persona of Jack Camp. Um, She's constrained for sure. She has physical constraints. She has to be very careful about her body. She like doesn't she tries not to get super inebriated because she might lose control of her body, which she needs to
Right.
protect. So there's always that physical constraint. Um, but I think she finds more of the freedom. Whereas Ben, when he's performing, and he's kind of always performing,
Mm,
he's anxious, he's afraid, he feels like a fake. And he responds to performance in a very different way, where I think it's something that sort of deeply unsettles him. But because he's performing in so many modes, he almost like doesn't know which one to land in or where it's
right.
safe. Um, and I think those are two ways that people may experience the many performances that I think is sort of the human thing to do to be part of a society where different social codes ask us for different things at different times of the day or our life. So that was a very long answer. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, I
Okay.
that was a thorough answer, as my mother would say. There's no long, there's just thorough. Um,
It's a good question, so I had to give it a good answer.
well, well, again, success. So, um, I do want to ask you, nearly every character in the book, kind of as you alluded to, is beholden to someone else, like whether
Mhm.
it's economically, socially, emotionally, even. What interested you about writing people who are never fully free, even in their most intimate moments? There's one of the characters, Delphin says, we all have a role to play. And so, were you thinking of sort of these, again, these constraints that folks have, uh, were you thinking of it as sort of a personal truth or social mandate or something closer to this is a survival strategy that these people have to do in this world, right? This is, this is set in a time, I believe before women were even allowed the right to vote, right? And yet you have, women having in some ways they're, exercising their agency, but at the
Mhm.
same time, right, being under this very patriarchal system that they have to operate in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that um, in general, again, kind of with the performance, I feel like there's many ways that we could define freedom. And I think one way that I think about it is like the freedom to be wholly yourself at all times. And I don't think that that's a kind of freedom that, like, as social animals, we really experience. Um, and there's places and times when we can feel that. But I think there's a lot of negotiation in public spheres with other people. Again, some of the same kind of considerations of safety and survival. And so I think the characters, reflect that struggle between being fully free, like having that ability to be fully themselves, and then the constraints that are built around them. And I did intentionally choose, this setting, this time period, for several reasons, but one of which was that gender roles were extremely strict.
Right.
There was a different attitude toward homosexuality, and it was in some cases very harshly penalized. In other cases, it was sort of ignored. But in general, it was not something you go around comfortably sharing with your friends at the docks or whatever it was, right?
Right.
Um, so I think in those situations, there's the sense that you know, the world that I built in Rough Trade is especially constraining. And it's
Mm,
especially difficult for characters to find that sense of freedom to be wholly themselves. And I think that the contrast of that, the high contrast of the setting versus their difficulty, just helped me explore that theme in a way that felt more productive.
yeah. As a, I'll say, as a friend of mine who also read the book said it, even though this was said in the late 1800s, for some folks it seemed like it seems like 2026 right now.
Yeah.
But anyhow, we'll get into that later. But
Okay.
um,
No, I want to talk about it. I'm ready. I've got a lot to
I'm
say.
sure you do. I'm sure you do. Um, but as you talked about like spaces where folks can go and be themselves, and one of those spaces is the Monte Carlo
Yeah.
in the book, which is this wonderful bar slash, I will say as a sci-fi nerd, I always thought the cantina scene in the first Star Wars, was great. And you go to Mos Eisley, I think, is the station. But I mean, the way that you paint the Monte Carlo in the book, it just feels like a place that you just I mean, there's roughness and there's tumbleness there, and there's also there's just it just has such a heart and a spirit, and it almost feels like a character itself. And so I want to ask you, when you were crafting the Monte Carlo, it almost feels like a pressure valve in the novel, right? From all this tension and pressure and friction that all of these characters have. It's sort of a
Mhm.
place where rules are bent and truth surface. And so what drew you to imagining a space where queerness, desire, and transgression can exist openly?
Yeah, so I think the first part of that I'll answer is that I think it does exactly function as the pressure valve in what we were just talking about, like in that light where it's a place where some people can be more wholly themselves. So
Mm,
it is a place of presence and of safety. Um, and to answer kind of the larger question, I've heard from so many queer readers who are like, I want to go to the Monte Carlo. And I'm like, me too. Like, let's go right now. It sounds amazing. Um, but I think the idea of a gathering space like this was very central to the book for me because part of what I wanted to focus on in this book too was queer community and queer
mm,
gathering spaces and queer presence, especially in this historical setting. And again, that's kind of a foil for sort of the isolation that Ben experiences and some of the choices he makes. You have, on the other hand, this place of queer community and queer gathering and joy and laughter. People trust each other, they watch out for each other there. Um, the bar itself is not anything based on stuff I've discovered in research. However, there's a lot of research that indicates that places like the Monte Carlo would have existed in the sort of working class port towns of this time. Um,
Right.
and there were often gathering spaces that were more friendly to homosexual encounters. There's been some great work by the historian Peter Boag about same-sex relationships in the Pacific Northwest in particular. And the attitudes toward, especially men having sex with men, was a little bit different in places where there were only men. It wasn't necessarily as dangerous or as condemned as it would have been maybe in like a city where gay men were often targeted by the police and harassed and jailed and beaten. So, you have this portrait of queer history that's depressing, and I feel like we've all seen it. We've all seen a movie where there's a queer bar and cops come in and like just beat the crap out of everybody, and it's awful. And I intentionally did not want to replicate the harm that did happen. That happened too, but I wanted to create a space where that didn't happen and there was safety and there was community because those places also existed. We just don't have the arrest records that are on
Right.
file that showed the queer bar raids happening. But there were certainly places of community and gathering where people would go and find others like themselves. And this goes, this is beyond queerness too. But the Monte Carlo for me was this very special place where I didn't want anything bad to happen to my characters there. Because I feel like we have enough of that, and that's not something I wanted to write into existence further. So,
Yeah, it's like this these wonderful interludes in the book where you just go and you can truly just sort of hang with the characters, right?
yeah.
And I just loved those moments so much. I do not mean to put you on the spot, but I did if my friend asked me to ask you this, you love the Monte Carlo. Is there potentially down the road like spin-offs in the works about the Monte Carlo potentially, or some short stories in the near future? Or
I'm not working on that right now, but if the chance came up, I want to be there as much as everybody else I've heard from. So there could be more because I do feel that, in general, especially right now, but always, like we need happy queer stories, and that's not to make it, simplistic or
Yeah.
saccharine, but I think we need reassurance that these places exist for us as queer people. So yeah, like if that comes up, sure, let's go to the Monte Carlo together.
Okay, that's not a no. That's not a no, Zachary. There you go. You got your question answered. Um, that's
Yeah, that's right. Your friend now can they wait and hope?
right. So, so turning to a little less joyful question, I suppose. The betrayal does run through the book in sort of complicated ways. It's not just
Mm.
personal betrayals, but it's also structural ones, I'll say. And so I want to ask you, I mean, how do you think about betrayal as something shaped by social conditions rather than just individual moral failure? I mean, all of these people, right, are operating in these systems and structures they didn't create. They're just
Mhm.
responding to, quite frankly.
I mean, that's the situation that I think many of us are put in by capitalism and by the patriarchy and by
Right.
racism is that we are in these structures where there might be moments, and especially, a novel is in some ways like a heightened reflection of what might happen to
Yeah.
us. But there might be moments where you have to choose between yourself and someone you love.
Yeah.
And that is not a choice anyone wants to have to make. And it's definitely a choice where a character or a person has been backed into a corner. Um, and I think there's various moments in the book where characters realize that someone would be prepared to betray them and they have to kind of recalibrate like what do I mean to this person? What do they mean to me with this knowledge? And sometimes they just have to sit with that knowledge. So yeah,
Mm.
that felt like a very sticky thread of inquiry in the book. And I don't ever like pretend to have answers in novels, but I love when they bring up questions. And so I feel like that's a
Yeah.
question that, you know, right now is a very topical question. Like, what does it mean for my safety versus someone else's safety? So these are things that we are definitely thinking about right now as a country, um, as maybe larger than that. And it's not a question with a neat answer, but it does, structures are in place that make those horrible choices kind of come to being. And I don't want to
Right.
use passive voice there, but um, yeah, I think that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it did. It did. Um, well, kind of keeping on that for a bit, you know, I don't want to call some of the romances in the books Shakespearean, but many of the love stories in Rough Trade are marked by imbalances of power,
Mhm.
safety and knowledge. So, what were you most interested in exploring, when excavating, these relationships under the conditions that these characters found themselves in?
Yeah, I feel like I don't know that any of the characters to me were in love. Maybe that's a horrible
Mm.
answer. But what I will say is they were definitely in relationship and often having a
Yeah,
lot of sex. And I think the power imbalances there also are a huge factor in those kind of like intimate negotiations.
right.
Um, but I do kind of, I have to say, like the tragic love story, yes, like I could see that being. There's certain beats there that, you feel like, oh, I just know what's going to happen. Um, yeah, so I think just the relational dynamics, I wanted them to feel complicated. I wanted people to be constantly making hard choices. That's something that like as writers thinking about a book, we always want to ask like, what could I do to this character to make them make an impossible choice with no good options? Because that's kind of where, you know, friction and excitement come from.
Yeah.
But I also will say too that as much as I don't know that I would label some of the main relationships so much as love, I think there's a lot of friendship love and platonic love
Hmm.
in the book. And that was certainly a choice I made in keeping with the sort of themes of like queer family, queer relationship building, where that oftentimes is not sexual, but there is a deep bond, a deep love.
Right.
Um, and that was very important to me too, just as that continuing portrait of how queer community develops and how it sustains its members.
Yeah, I want to, if I can just, I know you say that, and you are the author, so you're a definitive source on this, but that there were, no real sort of, I guess you would say, folks who were in love with each other or romances or so forth. But it, I will say, reading this book, and I was talking to my partner about this, it reminded me so much in some ways, and even though these books are very different. Um, but the Great Gatsby, I think last year celebrated its 100th
Hmm.
year or its centennial, and I just kept thinking about, for some reason, I kept going back to that in the sense of like, if The Great Gatsby were written today, this would
Mm.
it'd probably be your book, right? I mean, just in terms of just in terms of, right, I like it. If you go back to an reading The Great Gatsby as an adult, and there's Jay Gatsby is supposedly in love with Daisy, right? But
Right.
it's really more of a metaphor for something else, right? And this is it's not a certainly not it's not a symmetrical love affair, shall we say? And
Yeah.
so I kind of want to ask you that, is was there some deeper metaphor you were sort of going with, when it came to some of the relations of these people? Um,
I think for me, with the character dynamics, something I like to do is when I feel that they're fully formed, I just kind of put them in their sandbox. So, what that results in sometimes is they do things I don't expect. And I think in a way that I love with fiction, what characters do, the choices they make can read very differently to different readers. And I
right.
love that because no person's going to have the same experience of a novel that they read. Everyone's bringing their own personal matrix of experiences in life to each book. Um, so I don't know that I was working on like kind of a larger metaphor with any of the love stories, But
Mm.
certainly, I do feel like, especially in the case of Ben, um, and I'm just going to give spoilers. The book's been out for 2 years. With Ben and Adriel, I think Ben holds Adriel as this like so idyllic kind of life he could have, like held
Yes.
in the body of this other man, right? And in that way, yes, I can see that being like Adriel is a symbol of Ben's like freedom, his other life, and he's imbued with so much emotion. And I think there is love there. Um, but a lot is happening and it's not at all realistic and it feels very
Right.
much like in the brain where you're like, dude, this is not going to work out. Like, he
Yes.
knows it's
Yes.
not going to work out. So maybe that's why I hesitate to put the label of love on these things because I think the characters know what's going on even if they don't tell themselves what's going on. And I hope that
Right.
comes through.
Right. And I think that's why it reminded me so much of The Great Gatsby in the sense of
Mm.
there's this underlying destructive fantasies, right, that these
Yes.
characters are operating on while they are all sort of trapped in this capitalistic system, right, that they
Yes.
can't escape from. And let's just say it doesn't, we brought up Netflix before, it does not end like a Lindsay Lohan Netflix movie. I will just say that.
No.
No other spoilers other than that. But anyhow, um, I had we teased this out before, but even though the book is set in the late 1800s, it does feel, at least certainly to me and some other readers, it did feel deeply contemporary.
Mm.
And so, what questions about today were you hoping, in our present times, were you hoping that readers would really wrestle with through this historical setting?
Yeah, I love that it resonated as contemporary for you and folks you've spoken to, because that was really a hope. It's one of the reasons I wrote it in the present tense, because it's that sort of immediacy, and the setting is obviously immersive and taking you somewhere else, but I wanted it to feel like it's happening. And so, like on a craft level, that's sort of part of the, um, design. Um, I think there's so much that I find relevant to today in the book. And all of the themes of, queer solidarity, queer family, queer community. I really wanted those to be a very strong part of what drew readers in and gave them something to enjoy. But there's a lot of stuff that is very troubling that I feel like, as you mentioned earlier, this book could be happening in 2026 to some people. I think in certain ways, the book gets into those very direct parallels. A few examples are, the rise of news media as entertainment, and then now the concept of fake news or truth being malleable in public. Like this is the seeds kind of are in the book, and then I think like the reader today can draw their own conclusions. There's our attitude toward addiction,
Right.
and how we treat people who have addictions. Also, there was an actual opioids crisis in the late 1800s that is
Right.
very closely mirroring what we're experiencing now. And then, as now, it's sort of the book doesn't get into this as much, but um, the American government has always had a very racist and classist way that they go about the war on drugs. And I feel like that was happening in the 1800s. It's happening now. That is a through line that I think modern readers who are, looking for things they connect to will find those pieces. And none of that is surprising, right? Because
No.
now is built on our history. And if these things, happened before and were, not stopped, or people just forget or whatever, or it's making somebody money, which is usually the answer, they're going to continue these cycles. So, yeah, there's a lot there that I found to be reflective in the setting, that I hope modern readers can think about and wrestle with from our current perspective.
No, I certainly think that they have, as a friend of mine again who read the book said, it it's it's great that you put so much history in the book, because nowadays it seems like people have to find out history through novels versus actual history books. But
Yes.
that's that is another conversation for another time.
Got a
um,
lot to say about that too. So yeah, let's do this part two.
well, as well, as this is a Washington State branded event. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the city that the book is set in, which is Tacoma. Now, when I was growing up in Seattle, Tacoma was always sort of uh, the redheaded stepchild, if you will, of Seattle. It is its own city now, of course, but um, I was not aware that it used to be called, at least at one time, the City of Destiny.
Yes.
Which a character talks, a character shares that phrase in the book, and so I thought that was kind of ironic because at least in my interpretation, the novel just seems so deeply skeptical of destiny as a promise. And
Hmm.
so uh, I want to ask you, what does that phrase mean in the context of the book to you, and who actually gets to claim destiny in this world?
Yeah, I mean, when I put the phrase in, it was more of that sprinkling of like, wow, did you know this cool thing happened? That it was called the City of Destiny.
Yeah.
So it sort of started, as that dropping in of a bit of local lore. I do also have to share Bellingham's motto, which is the city of subdued excitement, which is really the best motto I've ever heard for a
It
city.
definitely fits the city. I'll say nothing against
Yeah,
Bellingham,
right.
but
And that's a more recent, more unofficial motto, but I heard it on the Amtrak once and I looked it up and it's real. So I mean, I think I didn't necessarily pick up on that phrase in the book itself, but when you bring up the question of destiny and what does it mean, the first thing I think of is why that word is troublesome to me, and it's because I'm thinking of manifest destiny and this
right,
white colonialist idea that like we have a God-given right to just go around killing people and taking all their stuff and profiting off of it. And I feel like that deep skepticism about capitalism and the systems that of harm that it engenders, the ways that the people, like the laborers, are suffering, like they're trying to have unions, the unions are getting infiltrated
right.
by strike breakers. Like there's all of that labor kind of struggle occurring too. So I think in the way you phrase the question, like, yes, I think the book is very skeptical of that notion of like a city with a promise, a city with a great destiny.
Mm.
I think the people that can claim destiny are the people with a lot of money. And that's really, that's sort of
Tell us
the,
all this time. It seems.
I
Yeah.
know, right? But
Mhm.
I do think that's a little bit of what the book is dealing with is, as we talked about a little bit before, just the systemic pressures on people, and the limits that those place, and being able to reach something like a poetic idea of like a destiny or like a bright future is not within the reach of many of the characters.
Yeah. No, that is definitely well said. Um, I want to ask you a couple of craft questions before we get into the audience questions.
Oh, the
Um,
time is flying. Okay.
yeah, I know. That's like 10 minutes ago or something. But anyway, I know there are some authors who say that, they try to act as gardeners, right? In the sense that, they plot up to about maybe the middle of the book. And then, they, as things progress, they try to just sort of guide the roots, if you will, towards
Hmm.
some sort of conclusion. And then there are others who they need to plot out everything from the first page to the last page. And so I want to ask you, because there are so many intersecting storylines and shifting
Hmm.
loyalties, and so I'm sure you have just an encyclopedia of background of the characters that did not even actually make the book. But I'm just curious, how did you keep track of the emotional continuity for all of the characters, even as their circumstances kept changing? And then, uh, I guess if you could answer my first question, as well, about like, do you consider yourself a sort of a precision plotter, or are you more of that sort of gardener?
Yeah, so I feel like talking about how you plot is like showing your dirty laundry, but that's okay. We're all here to talk about writing. I feel very allergic to plotting from page one. I know some people love
Mm.
it, but I feel super boxed in. And I feel like if I take options off the table for myself like that, I can't creatively problem solve later down the line. So my process is frustrating and slow, but it has so far served me well. But I like to start with a couple of characters and like a situation, and then
Mm.
I'll write a little bit and get to know them better and get to know their worlds. And then if I've chosen a setting like I did with Tacoma, I stop and I do a bunch of research about the setting to make sure that not only am I not making mistakes, but also research feeds in like ideas like, oh, they'd have these kind of shoes, like they'd be buying this at the market, they'd have like this trade war starting or like a dock worker strike. So all of that sort of gives richness to the world that I never would have thought of. And then when I have that kind of critical mass, I have to start getting in that sticky middle where you're like, what is everybody doing? So
Right.
I'm like feeling in the dark. Um, and once I get sort of three-quarters in, I do turn to plotting because then you're at the point where you've got like a bunch of loose ends, and if you don't start
Right.
braiding them together and making sense, it's not going to work. And then I go full like murderer room, where you have like sticky notes and like lines and like questions. Like I will take up a whole wall and make sure that, like you said, like emotional continuity is happening. People are in the place where I left them the last time we saw them, if that makes sense. Someone's not going to pick up a boat on Wednesday that comes in on Monday. So just those like
Right.
little questions. Um, and I'll make like a map. I make maps of tension arcs, like whose plot thread is doing something really crazy and who's like taking
Mhm.
a break so that there's a bit of a mix. Um, and that all sounds like so much, and it kind of is, but
Well,
somehow it works.
it's yeah, it might be much, but it certainly is effective. I will say that.
Yeah,
So,
that's good.
um, and just and then one more question before we get into the audience questions is: Are do you have to, and I know it is different for everybody based on obviously life circumstance. Many writers they still have to work a 9 to 5, and then and then write either early or late or on the weekends. But for you, have you found your most generative when it comes to writing at the same time every day? Is it whenever you can kind of fit it in? Is it on a typical day, or kind of what is your schedule like?
Yeah, so I'm in a bit of a different mode right now because I'm actually a PhD candidate. So
Oh,
I am
congratulations.
privileged, thank you, to be writing full time, which is the dream. But when I wrote Rough Trade, I was working a 9 to 5 job. And the way that I made sure I got my time in was I have a wonderful writing group of friends online. Some of them are in the Pacific Northwest, and some of them we would do in-person stuff. But when the COVID lockdown started, we all went online, and then friends from other places started to join, and we had this nice little group form. And so I wrote Rough Trade during a lot of the lockdown time. So I was working from home, and then in my little apartment, I would go to another room to be at a different, like, small, tiny desk and like get into fiction zone. So it was really just having a schedule. I think the writing group we met twice a week, once on a weekend, so everyone had more time, and then once after work. And that really helped me keep a schedule, especially on days when I just felt so like sapped from my work day. Um, and yeah, I would take like some weekends to just sit down and write. And I've also been very, very fortunate to have the support of residencies, and those are just again like times of magic because you go somewhere for 2 weeks a month. And some
Yeah.
very nice people like cook for you and make sure that you're eating food. And you just sit down and write. And you kind of go into child mode because you're like, oh, it's lunchtime. But you get to be uninterruptedly creative. And the last one I went to is called Story Knife. It's up in Alaska. It's absolutely gorgeous. I highly recommend it. And they focus on women and women's stories, women identified people stories. So it's just a lovely spot. And I'm so grateful for all of the opportunities to get to write in those places.
Yeah. Well, I will go now into the audience questions. This one comes from Elizabeth, who asked, did you have a favorite learning about Tacoma from your research? And did something you uncovered in your research force you to change the story?
Oh, so what was the first part of favorite? What about Tacoma?
Oh, did you have a is there something that was a favorite of yours that you learned about Tacoma from your
Oh,
research?
I see. Well, one thing that was interesting that I had to sort of work around was I learned that the ships would actually come down to the railroad yards. So those were way below town. They were kind of on the water for the ships to come, and then they'd have to go up this big cliff. And it was really hard at first because I wanted everybody to be down at the docks, but then everyone would go socialize and be away from the water up this big hill, like a long walk away. So just the geography of Tacoma in some ways was surprising and interesting. Because it's not quite the way that it's oriented today. And just figuring out like how can I use this to my advantage when it's so inconvenient was a good puzzle. And sorry, Marcus, what was the second part of the question?
Oh, and the second part was, and I think you might have actually uh, ended up answering it, but did something you uncovered in your research force you to change the story?
Oh, I would say like nothing forced me to change the story, but I think an answer to this that is a little bit of an adjacent one is I did at the Northwest Room, which is incredible, and thank you so much for hosting this event. Uh, I did find very exciting microfiche, and that sounds not exciting, but it really was because I found in these old Tacoma newspapers evidence that a journalist had helped bust a giant smuggling ring between Canada and the United States of opium. And so I went down that rabbit hole and I didn't expect to find something that was like so perfect. So it ended up being a great resource in terms of keeping me like plausible. I want my fiction to be plausible. So I always ask the
Right.
question, like, could this really happen? And it really did in terms of an undercover couple of journalists breaking up this smuggling ring. So you should all go look at microfiche sometime. It's really fun.
I will take note, everyone. Take
Yes.
note.
It's going away fast because everything's getting digitized. So go like look through the little window while you can.
Yes. Well, another audience question for you. Uh, this question says, will you be writing more in 1800s Washington, or are you thinking of writing more into the future? In essence, the 20th century.
Yeah, so my new book that I'm working on now is actually contemporary fiction. Um, I
So
guess it could,
dystopian then. I'm just joking.
yeah.
No, no,
Our
I'm kidding.
daily
I'm
life.
kidding.
No.
No.
Well, it is like the main kind of story topics that I'm digging into are border militarization and the prison industrial complex and immigration. So I feel like my books are always political, they're always queer, and this is just, I feel like I've been now able to kind of turn to topics that felt it's almost like impossible before, but I feel
Right,
a little bit better prepared as an author. Um, and I think that this is something at this moment that is very important to me as a citizen of this country to be having a novel that engages in these conversations and also kind of gets into the question of how did we get here? We
right.
can look back and find out. So that's I've left the 1800s.
Okay.
It's a
For
different
now, for
world.
now. Yeah.
But again, Monte
Well, I
Carlo
was just
spinoff, like call me.
yes. Absolutely, absolutely. I will say I hope you have a tremendous self-care routine while you're writing your current book. I am sure that is heavy.
Yes,
Um,
yes. Lots of walks,
but
lots of
glad
spending time with my loved ones. So
nice. Well, I'm glad for that. This one comes from a young writer. It says, what advice would you give to young writers on blending genres?
Yeah, so I would say take what you love about something and leave the rest, right? Like if you are going to be blending anything, you are not beholden to the rules. If, there's something you want to combine from genre A with genre B, and it would never happen in either world. That's the whole point, is that you are operating with a freedom to not have to owe the reader something they're expecting. So just
Mhm.
put in the pieces that move your story forward and that you find really interesting. Because I think if your book starts to feel boring to you, or like you're doing a paint by numbers, like something has gone wrong, and you need to find a way to reconnect to what's going to make you deeply invested. And if that's pulling in stuff from another genre, like, go have fun. Like we should be having fun as much as we can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to get your take on this. There's so many people who say it's so hard to be original and creative these days, and yet, you produce such a creative and original work, and yet, many people complain we have sort of the Netflixification of things, meaning, everything is sort of algorithmic. So many stories are like primed to some algorithm so that, you folks have to either repeat long exposition when they talk, because they're, these, you have certain films and so forth that are made to sort of be go on in the background, and not offend and not say anything that is too controversial and so forth. So I guess, what do you say to folks who are like, I really, to storytellers who are like, I really want to try to be original and try to be creative. It just seems like it's hard to be able to publish or sell something, or have or have a story that is picked up if it's, doesn't cater to uh a mass audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of the question of who are you writing for? If you're writing for
Mm,
a really big audience because you really want to make some money, like go do that too. There's no shame in that. But if you're writing for yourself, which I feel like I am with my books, you have to know that you're going to piss people off. You're going to have people who are uninterested in what you're doing, who are going to not pause to inspect what you're doing or be curious about it. And so I think I would say write the thing that deeply troubles you, that you need to kind of get into and answer in a way that interests you, and be prepared that others may not share that same obsession, that same question that you must try to answer. And don't let that stop you, because, even if you write a whole book and you're the only one that reads it, you spent time with yourself deeply considering something. And I don't think we have enough of that in our modern world. I don't think
yeah.
we have enough of that time and space and that deep thinking. And
Mm,
if that book in particular doesn't take off or doesn't get picked up or whatever it is, you've still sat with yourself and done that work and asked those questions, and then you can do it
yes.
again. So,
Yeah. So probably no project of yours will have Lindsay Lohan or Sydney Sweeney
you
appearing,
know,
maybe.
again, they can call me if they would like. I love what I made, and now if they love it too, that's fine.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, so I do want to sort of maybe close out with this question, because I do think, given our current times, it, it's fairly relevant.
Hmm.
But the novel really is about, to me at least, as my interpretation is that at the end of the day, this novel really is about people surviving inside systems that demand performance.
Hmm.
And that is just so true to me of whatever identity anybody, occupies these days. And so I want to ask you, what do you hope readers carry with them after finishing the book? What thoughts do you, as you said, you're not necessarily trying to give out answers, but you are trying to make people think. particularly at a time when it seems like critical thinking is not necessarily in vogue. So,
Yes.
what do you, what do you, what do you want to leave readers with?
I do hope that the threads of finding community are really a thing that resonate with people. Um, I also feel like in a lot of ways the book doesn't have a super happy message in some ways. I think I want to offer first, right, like that thread of like let's take care of each other. Where are spaces where we can come together and be ourselves and be safe and be taken care of. Let's make those spaces. Let's meet the people that can make those spaces with us. But I think there's the other kind of flip side of what happens when you're alone. And I think that's something that, again, I mean, everybody's read this. Ben, in the end, does not make the choice to turn to community. He makes the choice to turn back to sort of the hollow promise of community in this sort
Mm,
of patriarchal capitalistic world. That costs him so much. Like for a moment, even if he's just pretending, he kind of has this sense that like maybe I could be different, maybe I could be this way. Maybe I could be a little
yes.
happier. And he turns away from it. And I hope that that's a moment that readers sit with and kind of consider because again, like that's not an easy choice. These characters aren't making easy choices, and I think interesting books happen when characters have to make these suboptimal choices. But just
Right.
reflecting on like what that costs him, um, and how he will live after, I think is pretty tragic. His storyline is very tragic to me. Um, so I think that's an important question that readers might ponder is, how much are we willing to give up to fit in?
Mm,
How much of myself am I going to give up to make it in this world? And that's a hard question to answer, but maybe the book opens the door to that conversation.
yeah. Well, I will say this, Katrina, as we wrap up here. Um, everybody wants to write the great American novel, and you did. So congratulations. It's just such a joy and pleasure to read. Anybody who has not read it, please do so. And anybody who has not read it twice, please read it twice, read it three times. This is it's just an exquisite work of art. So thank you for it.
Thank you so much, Marcus. I really enjoyed this conversation and you had such thoughtful questions. I'm so happy we could share this time tonight. So thank you for being here.
Same, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you, Katrina. Thank you, Marcus. And thank you also to Gina at the Northwest Room of Tacoma Public Library and Charlie from Charlie's Queer Books. Appreciate your partnership for this program. And we're looking forward to your next book, Katrina. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.